So good morning, everyone. Thanks all for coming to the first annual Clear Street Disruptive Technology Conference. I am joined here by Ari Breadboard of TRM Labs. And Ari and I met in an interesting way. We were actually in Italy on vacation with our families. And I see someone completely covered from the sun on the beach because his wife is a skin cancer doctor. And we hit it off, and 2 years later, we're sitting here. So it's great to have you.
So cool.
It's been
Thank
fun.
you for having me. Really, really awesome.
Of course. For people who don't know about TRM and a little bit about your background, maybe you could kick off with that?
Sure, absolutely. So TRM is a blockchain intelligence company, which means we work with a number of different verticals. We work with every three-letter law enforcement agency in the United States. So think FBI, DEA, Secret Service, IRS, criminal investigation. And they use our software tool to track and trace illicit proceeds in cryptocurrency. So let's say there's a ransomware attack, Colonial Pipeline. The FBI used TRM in that case to track and trace the flow of funds to ultimately seize them back. We also work with regulators, so think SEC, CFTC, but also globally, Monetary Authority of Singapore, JFSA in Japan. And they use us to make licensing determinations on cryptocurrency businesses, and then ongoing supervision. So think New York Department of Financial Services deciding to give a bit license to a company, they're using our software for that. And then finally, we work with financial institutions. So Coinbase, Binance, Kraken, OKX, the crypto exchanges all use TRM for compliance, but then any big, mid-size financial institution is also using us to screen wallet addresses to make sure bad actors are not engaging with their platforms or doing transaction monitoring. Prior to joining TRM about 5 years ago, I spent about 11 years at the US Department of Justice as a prosecutor, and then about 2 years overseeing the national security apparatus at the US Treasury Department.
So that's actually a great segue. You've had a really unique path going from the DOJ to Treasury to TRM. What's the through line in that journey that sort of helps shape the way you look at today's digital asset ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that it's really always been about protecting the financial system from bad actors. And I did that at the Department of Justice by really focusing on that intersection of money laundering and national security, what I call threat finance. Think North Korea or terrorist financiers or sanctions criminal prosecutions. And then at Treasury, I was able to sort of oversee OFAC, which is our sanctions regulator, FinCEN, which is our financial intelligence unit, and then other components at Treasury. And then about 5 years ago, when I was sort of thinking about, what do I do next? I looked around and I said, well, look, the crypto ecosystem is growing, but we also are seeing it attacked at scale, whether we're talking about North Korea hacks, whether we're talking about really an epidemic of scams that are going on. How can I sort of use the background and skills? And joined TRM about 5 years ago. We were maybe 6 or 8 people. Today we're about 350 people across with a really global team. So it's really, if I think through a through line, it's basically protecting or building a safer financial system.
And I think it's interesting because Clear Street's modernizing market infrastructure while TRM is truly modernizing risk infrastructure. Where do you see the biggest points of intersection between sort of both of those worlds?
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that's been really cool, I think much of my time at TRM, it's been about the public sector, right? FBI, IRS, criminal investigations, they've been using tools to track and trace the flow of funds in crypto for a while now, 10-ish years. One sort of like level setting piece here is, I think there's a narrative out there that crypto is only used for money laundering or that crypto is anonymous. And I think many of you now, we sort of flip that narrative a bit, but the reality is that crypto lives and moves on blockchains, which are trackable, traceable, immutable public ledgers. They're the ultimate crime scene. So we're able to go back, we call hops or many, many transactions to watch the flow of illicit proceeds. And we're able to track and trace those things in ways we never could before. And that's why we can do anti-money laundering, we can do compliance, we can do regulation a lot better in crypto than we ever could in the traditional world. When I was a prosecutor, I was doing cases involving networks of shell companies and hawalas and high-value art and real estate and diamonds and bulk cash. Like, there was no public ledger to track and trace those things. So I would say that like the public sector has known this for a while and has used these tools. But to your question, what we've really seen over the last 12 months is this explosion of digital assets. I mean, we've seen this ecosystem grow exponentially, and I'm really not even talking about the price of Bitcoin, which has doubled in the last year or so. I'm talking about this proliferation of stable coins, right? I'm talking about the Genius Act, which passed over the summer. I'm talking about every large financial institution in the world is talking about how to custody digital assets, how to offer digital assets to customers. So I think there's so much opportunity right now, but as we're thinking about opportunity, we also need to be thinking about compliance, regulation, sort of how to keep the ecosystem safe. So in terms of the work that ClearStreet is doing, working with clients out there, I think so many folks are engaging right now, and it's like, hey, we can both do this, quickly and at scale, but also sort of compliantly.
What are you seeing as sort of the biggest risk area right now for your clients?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, like kind of going back a moment, I think 24/7 about risk, right? How do we stop bad actors from engaging with crypto? And there are a host of different risks and threats within the crypto ecosystem, but it's really important to ground it in the reality. And that is about 1% of cryptocurrency transactions are illicit. So that means about 99% of crypto flows are lawful transactions, the overwhelming amount of activity. Now, I spend my entire life thinking about that 1%, and we're never going to sort of do away with that 1%, right? If we didn't have any risk in a financial system, then no one would want to engage with that financial system, right? Like, bad guys go to where the money is. But that 1% is North Korea stealing $1.5 billion from the Bybit exchange in February of this year. That money is being used for weapons proliferation and destabilizing the Korean peninsula. We see cartels starting to work with Chinese-based money laundering organizations to launder drug proceeds. We've seen $53 billion since 2023 in scams and fraud. I'm sure every one of you gets a crazy text message like 10 times a day, like, hey there, or want to golf today, or some other thing, right? That's leading up to what ultimately will be a romance/cryptocurrency investment scam that we call pig butchering. We've seen $53 billion since 2023 in that type of activity. So the reality is that, like, there's still very little illicit activity, but that illicit activity is really significant. It can mean the loss of life savings or serious national security threats.
So all those text messages I get them all the time. It's interesting. So I think the policy landscape is clearly moving fast. Stable coins, market structure proposals, MICA, MAS tokenization pilots. What's the one shift that feels most consequential for market participants, over the next 12 months?
I think stable coins. I mean, and it's almost like I'm sick of talking and hearing about stable coins, but I would say in the last 6 or 8 months, stable coins have solved a problem for a long time, right? And that's the volatility of crypto assets, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum or Sol or any other asset. And I think that it's this perfect moment where you're seeing regulatory clarity, right? Like, we finally have crypto legislation in the United States in the Genius Act. We will have market structure sometime in 2026. You heard it here first. It will not be in 2025, despite what anyone is telling you. I think even Senator Scott said yesterday that he saw market structure actually hitting the floor in early next year, which I know we were trying to get it in the next couple of months. But we're seeing this incredible convergence of regulatory clarity, which all of you in this room need, financial institutions need, with just a lot of market activity. And I think that's really the exciting moment. And we're going to see large financial institutions. We're going to see more activity in the decentralized finance space. So I'd say just like this rapid growth of the ecosystem. I mean, we're seeing crypto grow, 50% or more year over year in the United States. We've seen 50% more activity in the first 6 months of 2025 as we did in the same period last year. So the ecosystem is growing, but we're going to continue to see bad actors go to where the money is. I mean, one like scary piece to this over the last year or so, we've seen this spate of what people call wrench attacks, which are violent crimes associated with cryptocurrency, right? These are just thugs who are targeting folks who have social media presence, who speak at conferences, who are founders, and basically threatening them for their keys. We've seen kidnappings. So as more money is in the crypto ecosystem, we're going to continue to see bad actors go there. but we really need to leverage the technology, which allows us to trace and track funds in ways we really never could before.
So I think that's interesting. You're talking about regulators. So when you sit down with the regulators and the policymakers, what are they most focused on given the context of what we're speaking about? And what do you wish more of them understood about, or more people here understood about how this policy is actually getting made?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And there's a whole spectrum right now of what's happening. I've spent a lot of time over the last 12 months working on Capitol Hill, meeting with policymakers, and they're really still, I think, getting up to speed on this technology. I think they're starting to understand the ways we can do anti-money laundering better in the space. But I'd say right now, if the questions that I'm getting on Capitol Hill, as they're thinking about market structure, are around decentralized finance. And quite frankly, I want to talk about how to regulate exchanges, what the SEC's role should be, what the CFTC's role, but it immediately goes to DeFi. And the question is basically, how do we do anti-money laundering? How do we do national security type issues in a world without intermediaries, right? I mean, the entire US Bank Secrecy Act, our anti-money laundering regime, is predicated on regulating banks, right? Banks are required to send silo suspicious activity reports to their regulator. And I think what Congress is really struggling right now is how do we have Treasury, how do we have the OCC, how do we have SEC, CFTC regulate in a world where there are no intermediaries, right? The promise of crypto is peer-to-peer value transfer at the speed of the internet, cross-border, right? But who is going to be on the hook is what I keep hearing from people. And the way I kind of answer that is, look, I can tell you how to do this from a legislative perspective, but really let me just tell you what is done today. And we walk through how at TRM we work with the leading DeFi protocols like Aave and 1inch and Uniswap and others who are all using TRM on their front-end interface, basically through their website, where most people are still interacting with DeFi today. So there's I'd say there's like a host of questions, and I keep talking about stablecoins, but even with Genius already passed, the questions that we're getting now from the regulators, particularly the US Treasury Department, is like, well, now we have Genius, how should we implement? So I have filed 3 RFI responses, request for information responses to the US Treasury really in the last 2 weeks on the way we're at least thinking about how to leverage capabilities that stablecoin issuers have, whether it's Circle or Tether or somebody else, to do due diligence, to do transaction monitoring, to do anti-money laundering on their platform. So I would say right now the regulators want to talk stablecoins and how to implement Genius, and the policymakers want to talk about how we can do what in the market structure legislation should be on DeFi in particular.
And that's interesting, especially with stablecoins, and what you talked about with the wrenching, and the threat landscape is evolving, basically as fast as the technology is, the scams, the cybercrimes, cross-border fraud, nation-state activity, as you mentioned. What is keeping you up at night in the context of those different types of evolving criminal activities?
It's probably AI, which I know is keeping everybody up at night. And I don't think I've ever seen anything move faster in my lifetime. And we all are using it in our workflows. I think it has accelerated the way we can work, productivity. But bad actors, again, are also leveraging this technology. So imagine a world where we've seen you can 10x the amount of scam activity, right? You don't need individual scammers sitting there with a cell phone texting you anymore. You can leverage hundreds of thousands of AI agents to be able to do that. You don't need, I think there was a large ransomware group called Lockbit that was taken down by UK and US authorities about a year ago. They had 200 affiliates, which are basically individual attackers who worked for them. You don't need 200 affiliates. You could have 200,000 affiliates when you're AI agents, when you're using AI agents. So what really keeps me up at night is the fact that I think bad actors are scaling their activities. We've removed the human bottleneck, right? In the world that we've lived in before, humans were committing crimes, and it was limited by how smart or not humans were, and the number of them, and how many hours they had in the day, and all these types of things. And today, AI supercharges that activity. It removes the human bottleneck. They can move faster. So what keeps me up at night is like, how can we at TRM build tools to enable law enforcement, to enable compliance professionals to move as fast as bad guys are starting to be able to move using agentic agents.
And that's a great follow-up question. How are you at TRM thinking about mitigating that risk with the proliferation of AI across these types of scams?
Yeah, it's a couple different things. I think it's a combination of tech. So we have AI in every layer of our platform, helping us build out patterns of on-chain activity that's indicative of fraud and financial crime. And we're building partnerships. In August, we announced something called the Beacon Network, which some of you may have heard of and some of you may be members of. Basically, it accounts for about 80% of all crypto transaction volume. So think Coinbase, Binance, Kraken, OKX, HTX, Poloniex, Crypto.com, Blockchain.com, but then also fintech, so Stripe, Robinhood, PayPal are all members. And then we've married them with about 60 global law enforcement agencies. So think, United States, Korea, Europe, the UK, and law enforcement agents are flagging illicit crypto addresses and sending out what we call a beacon alert, think Lighthouse, right? And all the exchanges are getting that alert, and then in real time are able to block and ultimately work with law enforcement to seize that information. And the reason I bring that up is it's all about speed, right? Like, how can we move as fast as bad actors are moving on chain? And public-private partnerships are a huge part of that.
Now it's interesting. It's scary, but I think it's interesting, the approach that you have.
It's all scary, and like the last thing I want to do is get up here and like just scare the crap out of people. But I think the reality is that the tech is extraordinary, right? I mean, we've never had technology where you could see every transaction on an immutable public ledger. And law enforcement just needs the tools and the training and the expertise. And we're so early. Every law enforcement agent, every compliance professional is going to have an app like TRM on their desktop, and they'll be able to trace this stuff. And it's just going to be like anything else that we've ever had to follow the money before. But the reality is right now the technology is evolving so fast and it feels so existential. But we're hopefully I'm thinking about it a lot, hopefully, so a lot of you don't have to, and it's built into your workflows.
Well, I think as we wrap up here, if you had one message for the builders and practitioners in the ClearStreet ecosystem, in terms of navigating regulation, understanding risk, and staying ahead of these threats, what would you leave?
Yeah, I would just say I see compliance, I see cybersecurity, which we don't do, as critical infrastructure, right? As you're building in this new environment, build with those things in place, because sort of one hack, I promise you, none of this will have been worth it, or one, engaging with a sanctioned entity will not have been worth it. So I'd say that think through as you're building, build with these tools, build with compliance as critical infrastructure, know how to work with law enforcement. But the reality is we're building a better, safer financial system, and the technology is enabling that. It's just making sure that we are building with this as critical infrastructure.
All right, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Always
Thank
pleasure.
you. Yep.
Thank you.